Shut Up or We'll Shoot. That's probably the strange title. You probably are looking at this and going, "What in the world does that mean?" Well, it's got a story behind it. It truly does, and well, we have to try to talk about this about someone who has just gotten back from the region in the Middle East, in Jerusalem and near the Gaza Strip, that has some very interesting stories to tell. And it's one of your favorites on our show, Matthew Ho, former combat Marine and current associate director of the Eisenhower Media Network. And medianetwork.org, actually, as it is. Former State Department official. Matt, glad to see you back safe and sound. I got to say, when you first told me that you were heading out there, I was a little concerned for your safety, but glad to see you back worse from the wear.
Well, thanks, Danny. Yeah, I appreciate it. It really no great danger on our part. Actually, the last time I was there, when I was with a Veterans for Peace delegation, that was more dangerous. That was 2017. And that's because we took part in nonviolent resistance by the Palestinians in the West Bank. And so we got gassed a number of times, assaulted. I had a settler run his car into me, things like that,
Yeah.
And this time around, things are so bad there. The crackdown on the Palestinians, the move towards annexation of the West Bank. This is aside, of course, from the genocide that's happening in Gaza, but it's occurring in the West Bank, what I was able to observe. Those types of things, those types of nonviolent resistance is just simply not possible any longer. It's just the Israelis, whether it be the military or settlers, are too violent. They've been given the reason, through the October 7th attacks to act as they want against the Palestinians without any repercussion, of course. And so any type of thing like marches or demonstrations or anything done by the Palestinians is met by deadly violence, which, of course, has implications, as you can imagine, right? For if there's no relief valve, if there's no ability for the Palestinians to non-violently resist, everything must go through violent resistance. And of course, we started seeing that before October 7th. We started seeing that in 2022, particularly following the attacks on the Al-Aqsa Mosque by the Israeli police in 2021, the air attacks on Gaza in 2021, those types of things. So you'd seen prior to October 7th, a reemergence of violent resistance in the West Bank. But now that's all the Palestinians in the West Bank have is violent resistance. And I think we're going to see as Israel moves towards annexation, which they're speaking openly about, and with the Trump administration, of course, supporting that, I think the violence is going to reach levels well beyond what we saw in the first and second intifadas.
That's really saying a lot.
Yeah, exactly.
I wonder if maybe as an illustration of what you're talking about is the title that we've chosen here, "Shut Up or I'll Shoot." That's from one of your Substack posts that you made during your trip here. I wonder if you can explain what that means and what happened.
Yeah, so we met with a number of people on our delegation, a number of Palestinians, and one of them was the mother of a Palestinian woman, a Christian woman. And I want to make the note about that she's Christian because many Americans, many people in the West do not realize that Palestinian Christians endure the same subjugation, oppression, apartheid, violence that Palestinian Muslims do. I think many, particularly in the United States, just don't know that. They think this is simply a Jewish versus Muslim thing, and that's it. When, as we all know, that's not the case. But this is Lulu Nasir. Her daughter, Leanne, who's a 24-year-old college student, was taken by the Israeli military in the spring, in April, I believe, if I remember correctly, and without charge, without accusation, without allegation, without anything, certainly no evidence. And she has been held in Israeli prison for the last 8 months under what's known as administrative detention. So that means that the Israelis can hold people without charge indefinitely. And of the 12,000 Palestinians held in the West Bank, 12,000 Palestinians from the West Bank who are held in Israeli prisons, about half are under administrative detention. And that doesn't mean that the people who aren't under administrative detention, who have real charges against them, actually have anything real against them. We met college students who have friends who are also college students who are arrested and charged with incitement and some other types of disruption to the state type charges because they posted on Instagram about Gaza. And those young men have been in prison for about 4 months. So whether they have charges or not, it really doesn't matter because it's all underneath this rubric of occupation. The thing with Lulu, Leanne's mother, when the Israeli soldiers came into their home and took Leanne, they put a rifle up in Lulu's face and said, "Be quiet, or we will shoot you." And then when her husband tried to intervene and protect his daughter, the same thing was done to him. And that's the last they saw their daughter, Leanne. They've not seen her since. There's a lawyer who meets with her. The lawyer tells her she's doing well. But as we all know, and it's well documented, whether it's from the UN or from human rights groups, including Israel's own human rights group, B'Tselem, from journalists, from Palestinian testimony itself, we know that Israel systematically and deliberately tortures nearly everyone that they take into their detention. So it's likely that Leanne, like the thousands and thousands and thousands of other Palestinian prisoners, is being tortured.
That's just a little heartbreaking to even contemplate. I wonder if you can just talk about from your observations in the split that I've heard about a lot in Israeli society, that there's a substantial portion which is almost rabidly behind Netanyahu, actually pushes him further. They want the clearing out of the Gaza Strip. They want annexation, if not also clearing out the Palestinians from the West Bank, etc. And then another portion, and I wonder if you can comment on what the percentages of each of these are, that are actually view things kind of like you and I do, that they're shocked and appalled by what they see, especially things that are done in their name, and they want to go back to, or go to, an area where there's some sort of ability for everybody to live in peace. How did you observe those two groups?
So we met with Israelis as well as Palestinians. We met with rabbis, with October 7th survivors. And there is not nearly that big a split in Israeli society. The vast majority of Israelis are supportive of the genocide, the ethnic cleansing. Their feelings towards the Palestinians tend to line up among each other, basically among the Israeli public, which matches the Israeli political system. There is, the two poles essentially, or maybe not two, but three. It's essentially military occupation, resettlement, annexation, and ethnic cleansing. Those seem to be the discussion points where Israeli society actually exists in terms of real discourse. Conversations like you and I are having about the need for a peace process, negotiated settlement, the reality of the atrocities being committed against the Palestinian people are in the shadows. They're in quiet conversations. They're not discussed loudly. Certainly, they don't make any appearances on Hebrew language media. Al Jazeera actually just looked at this the other day when the arrest warrants were issued for Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant. Al Jazeera looked at Israel's media, and they said they couldn't find any substantive discussion about the war crime charges against Netanyahu and Gallant. It was all, essentially, accusing the Hague and those outside of Israel of being anti-Semitic, but no discussion whatsoever about what the specific charges were and whether there was any substance to it. And you see that in Israeli society. There is no there's no space, there's no discourse, and there's no political power for anything other than total military victory, military occupation, resettlement, ethnic cleansing, annexation. Those are the points that are talked about. Though even those that we met that would be, we would feel comfortable talking with, Danny. So I met with people who are part of Israeli peace groups, and most of them would not say that a genocide's occurring in Gaza. It's as if there's a line that they won't cross, that there's a door they won't open in their head. Certainly, you can understand the moral injury they would endure having to admit that they themselves are participating in the same type of atrocity, the same type of genocide that has been perpetrated against the Jewish people throughout history. So the identification that even the most liberal peaceniks among the Israeli population have, their identification with their history precludes them in many ways from fully acknowledging what Israel is doing. Even to the point when we were down by Gaza in this town of Sderot, it was as if the people we were speaking with were acting as if nothing was really occurring in Gaza, or that it was like really just a fight between Hamas militants and the Israeli forces, and that the Palestinian civilians had to really stand up and disavow Hamas. That was the real issue here. So all these excuses and justifications and lies that even people who are in favor of a peace process, people who wanted a ceasefire, they still wouldn't accept the reality of what was occurring there, what Israel was doing, to the point that I actually had to ask them, can you hear the airstrikes that are going on? And, of course I knew they could hear the airstrikes. They're 7 kilometers away from Gaza. Of course they could hear the airstrikes, but I wanted them to say that to note that dissonance that they themselves, as peace activists, as people who were arguing for a political settlement, whether it be a one-state solution or a two-state solution, that they still had that dissonance, that they still were unable to really accept and to admit out loud what Israel was carrying out.
And to what extent, I guess, well, let me rephrase the question. Netanyahu has come up many times and said that they are, especially in Gaza, that they're moving on to total victory, is the phrase he keeps using. From what you've seen on the ground, is that possible?
No, it's not possible. That lines up with the media and the society. And even to, like, Danny, when you're driving down when we drove down from Jerusalem down to the Gaza border, you don't see any signs that the country is at war. At that point, we're foreigners. We've got a chartered vehicle. So we're on the Israeli apartheid road, right? We're on the road that the Palestinians can't be on. So we're really driving through Israel proper itself. And the only thing that you see that would, if you knew what you were looking at, that would tell you that something was going on, was you see the yellow balloons, you see yellow flags, which is for the hostages. If you go through a roundabout, there'll be these yellow chairs set up with the faces of the hostages on it. And that's about it. That's all you see. And so I should add that was another discussion point, the hostages, along with, but they talk about military victory, but it's the same way we had, Danny, in throughout Iraq and Afghanistan, our politicians, our media talking about victory in Iraq. And, if you push them on it, what does that mean? They couldn't, they couldn't answer it. And that's the same way here. The idea that certainly, it doesn't, but for the Israelis, it doesn't matter. The victory, in the sense of having some type of solution or settlement or end to the issue, they already know the answer to that. And in Gaza, it's the destruction of the Palestinians in Gaza. The ethnic cleansing of the north of Gaza seems to be what they're going to be able to achieve, right? So as we look at Gaza, we see it going into the next phase of the genocide. I describe it as the creation of concentration camps and money making. So we've seen in the press in the last few weeks these stories about American companies, Israeli companies, who are in negotiation with Israel, backed by the United States, to operate in Gaza to backfill the IDF. So you have these contractors coming, and one of them, Constellus, which is the successor to Blackwater, will come in and they will fill this role of as mercenaries, as development organizations, as contractors, whatever you want to call them. And the Palestinians, particularly in the north, will be segregated into camps, and they will be concentration camps in a way that's unique for concentration camps. Usually, you can get into concentration camps, but you can't get out, right? In this case, I think it's going to be the opposite, where you can't get into any of those camps, but you can get out, because that's what they want. They want the Palestinians to leave. And in southern Gaza,
leave where? Go where?
That's from North Gaza, they will go down below the Netzarim corridor, right? That road that the Israelis have built that divides Gaza into north-south, roughly about 2/3 of the way north through the Gaza Strip. And they'll be pushed down there. And I think the Israelis will figure that out later, but they're going to keep the Palestinians penned in the south. They'll immiserate them, and they'll continue to have this fantasy that eventually Egypt is going to open the borders, that Jordan's going to allow them in, that cruise liners are going to show up and shuttle these people to wherever, South America or something like that. That is, I think, that is the idea behind the Israelis right now. And of course, we've seen as well that the Israelis are preparing to put settlements into Gaza. When we were there, that day we were at the Gaza border, Daniela Weiss, who is a lead settler, a person, she was there that day. She was there that day on the border, giving a press conference saying how we will be within Gaza in a year. And she had brought like 40 trailers or 40 caravans down there with her for like a photo op, essentially. And now today I read that she was saying that they've got 750 families lined up already to go into Gaza. So I think that's the Israeli Gaza plan. So you don't see really a need to have a victory. This is essentially just a rolling ethnic cleansing process.
Well,
And
do you
then
see any possibility that Egypt or Jordan or both would be willing to finally consent and allow them to come in?
no. I mean, both for reasons of they don't want to participate in Israel's ethnic cleansing, right? They don't want to justify it. But then the other part is they don't want the Palestinians coming in either. I mean, neither Egypt nor Jordan wants to have a million, 2 million dispossessed people coming into their country. Jordan has a history with the Palestinians, as many people may know. You know, King Abdullah's father was almost overthrown by the Palestinians. You go back in the 1970s, you know, and then of course, Egypt, the regime there under tremendous economic pressure. They don't want anybody who's going to come in who's going to bolster anything that may be difficult for them. So I think this thinking would be was that the Muslim Brotherhood, the religious factions within Egypt, which are opposed to the Egyptian military government under Sisi, would be bolstered by an influx of 500,000, 1 million, 2 million Palestinians. So I don't see how the Jordanians or Egyptians, either for righteous reasons of we're not participating in your ethnic cleansing, or for more practical reasons of we don't want these people destabilizing us, won't let them in. And in the West Bank is West Bank, as we've seen, Danny, right, in the last few weeks, the Israelis openly talking about annexing it. Certainly, there'll be no pushback from the Trump administration. We all heard the stories that Miriam Adelson's, the quid pro quo for her $100 million to Donald Trump's campaign was the annexation of the West Bank. So you can clearly see that the Israelis are preparing for that annexation. And I think that annexation will look like in the more rural areas, the areas that are called B and C under the Oslo Accords, those areas will be subsumed by Israel. The villages will be destroyed. Pogroms will take place. The Palestinians will be forced to flee. Settlements will be built there. And the larger built up urban areas will essentially be isolated from one another and will be left.
Matt, do you see? I mean, that seems so egregious that it seems like that the world would finally take some action, that they couldn't contemplate that going on, especially openly. Daniela Weiss talking about it is bad, but anybody taking action to actually do that with settlers, et cetera. I mean, the first one going in there, it's going to be a major issue. Is that actually possible, though?
Oh, it certainly is. It certainly is. I mean, we were, if Gary wants to put up the photo of Fakhri Abidab and his wife Amna, we visited a couple there in Silwan, which is a part of Jerusalem. It's right in the Kidderot Valley. So if people are familiar with Jerusalem, it's right down there below the walls, right? So this big valley that runs between the Mount of Olives and the wall of Jerusalem. This is what we're talking about, that neighborhood. And for years, the Israelis have been demolishing homes there. They've demolished, I think, more than 125 homes. Just in the last month, they've demolished 7 or 8. And this family, Fakhri and Amna, their home was demolished back in February. It was the home where he was born. But somehow the Israelis and the Israeli court system said that your home is illegal, and they demolished it. And this has been going on. It's very prominent. This is a big deal. I mean, there's photo of what the house looks like or what's left of their house. And they live now in a trailer next to that rubble. And there's a demolition order against that trailer that they live in. And just to, just show how you talk about how egregious, Danny, how cruel it all is. The Israelis then give him, after they demolish his home, this is like for all the Palestinians, they then give the Palestinians a bill to pay for the demolition, right? So they have a $10,000 bill against them that if they don't pay, they will arrest him and they'll seize his bank account and everything else. But this trailer they're living in is under demolition order, along with about 115 other homes in that neighborhood, which means about 1,500 people. And here's the thing. You have people come and visit him all the time. He showed me a photo of Hans Wexel, who is the chief for Palestinian affairs for the American embassy in Jerusalem. And this guy, Wexel, again, the head of the Palestinian affairs for the U.S. in Israel and Palestine, he was sitting in the same seat I was sitting on this man's couch. And of course, they won't do anything. They like the photo op. They want to make it seem as if they're doing something or concerned about it. Now, with the Trump administration, the Trump embassy, they won't even do that. They won't even give the photo op. They won't even like make pretend that they care. So in some ways, is the Biden administration worse because they're lying, they're doing this charade, this farce, while at least the Trump people will be clear about what they're going to do. But what Fakhry said is that all these people from the UN, people from international organizations, from NGOs, from the American government, EU, whatnot, they come into his home, they tell him they're going to help him, and they have no intention of helping him. They have no intent. I mean, and as he said, and this is what I said in my piece, he said they're all liars. And I think in the 8 days I was there, Danny, that phrase, they are all liars, was probably the most true thing I heard during my time there.
Man, it's just hard to hear all these things, knowing the human carnage and suffering that just no one cares about. Republican, Democrat, just British, French. I mean, just do you see anyone in the world that's actually willing to use some political power and capital to try and do anything about it, or is it truly hopeless for them?
I really do think it's hopeless, Danny. I don't see anyone. I don't see. I mean, the Palestinians I spoke to about this, including people who were once part of the Palestinian Authority, who were a prominent part of the international delegations that Palestinians had, they don't see it either, and they don't see any support from it. They don't trust the Arabs. I mean, look what happened with Hezbollah with this ceasefire with Israel. I know there are people who are claiming online Hezbollah didn't actually take in the ceasefire. Well, Naim Qasem, they're the head of Hezbollah now. He essentially said they did today. So for people who are going to type in the comments like you've been doing the last 2 days that they didn't agree to the ceasefire, please give it up. They did. And what does that mean then for the Palestinians? Right? I mean, if Hezbollah has accepted these terms with Israel, that they are not going to engage in attacks on Israel, the one thing that may have been putting some pressure on, one of several things that were putting pressure on the Israelis, that's gone now, right? So the Israelis are they've removed, the Israelis have been successful in their operation in Lebanon if their goal was to remove that pressure from Hezbollah on their north so that they don't have to keep their resources, their intention, their efforts focused on Lebanon as they have. They can now redirect that onto the West Bank. We're seeing the same with Iran. We're hearing back, oh, Iran's going to attack again. We hear back and forth, but it's not coming. And the same with Yemen. Yemen will fire a drone or a missile. Yemen, the Ansar Allah, the Houthis have done a great job shutting down the Red Sea. But the idea that somehow they're going to march in, right? And we had heard these stories of the Yemenis, the Iraqis, the Syrians were going to send cadres to southern Lebanon. It didn't appear. It didn't materialize, right? So certainly the United Nations cannot do anything. It'll be nice when the ICJ rules that a genocide is being committed, but that'll be it. It'll just be a historical ruling, a condemnation, a damning of Israel for its actions, but there won't be anything material coming out of it. There won't be anything tangible. I mean, even if you look at, Danny, who's the biggest exporter of coal to Israel? Israel relies upon a lot of coal-fired plants for electricity. The biggest supplier of coal is South Africa, the folks who are leading the genocide case in the ICJ. They're still selling them. They might be the ones leading that effort to get the ICJ to determine that genocide's occurring in Gaza, but they're also selling them literal boatloads of coal every day. So for the Palestinians, I just don't see any help. I don't see where's the intervention going to come from? Where's the Deus Ex Machina going to come from? I mean, you could go and look at, like, say, a few weeks ago at the BRICS, and there's a statement about Gaza and everything else, statement about Palestine and Israel. Nothing comes out of that, though. So the Palestinians really are in the position that, like Thucydides said 2,500 years ago or 3,000 years ago, whenever he wrote, Peloponnesian, about Peloponnesian wars and everything, that the strong will do as they want and the weak will suffer as they must. And that's the plight of the Palestinians. So I just don't see where the intervention is going to come from, where the help is going to come from. And the only thing they have going for them is that they are in the Holy Land. If Israel did not have to keep the holy sites open, because of they don't want it to get that bad. They don't want to isolate themselves that much from the world, but mainly also too, they need the money, the income from it. If we didn't have that, I wouldn't have been able to get into to Palestine and Jerusalem, right? It would have been closed off. So at least that's the only thing they have is they have the idea of Palestine and Israel being a location of the holy sites and requiring them to be open so tourists can go in. Otherwise, there'd be nothing to keep Palestinians from being completely blacked out from the world.
Man, that's really troubling to hear. In the last few minutes that we have here, I was going to show you some other stuff, but I actually want to bypass that and talk about something that's related, though. When this war against the Palestinian people in Gaza started in the wake of the terrorist attack by Hamas in October 23, there was the so-called axis of resistance. It was trying to help them, whether that was Yemen, whether that was these groups in Iraq and in Syria, certainly Hezbollah and Iran, various pieces. They were all doing things to try and put pressure on Israel, etc. Well, now then, with the absolute just eviscerating of Hezbollah from the senior leadership on down, and now they've got this ceasefire in place, etc. That's opened up some other problems somewhere else, because now in Syria, where one of the other benefactors of this axis of resistance, they had help from Hezbollah and they had help from Iran, and now then they're both reeling because of the attacks they've had from Israel. And so now that it seems like some of these jihadist groups have taken advantage of that opportunity and are moving on Aleppo and some other areas in that part of the country. How have you seen the Israeli reactions against these people increase the chance for more violence up in the Aleppo area?
Well, certainly, I think. I mean, there's no evidence of this other than past associations, and because it's playing out in front of our eyes as it does at these, as you were saying, Danny, coinciding with the ceasefire in Lebanon comes this major advance out of HTS in Syria. We talked earlier about this, and I wasn't fully up to speed on it when I talked to you, and I've read quite a bit about it since then. And I mean, now the Syrians are knocked off balance. Hezbollah has been effectively, if we believe the ceasefire is going to work as it does, has been taken out of it. The Yemenis are still doing the God's work, essentially, in trying to help Gaza by blockading the Red Sea, but they're on their own now. What Israel has been very effective at is peeling apart the axis of resistance one by one. I mean, so rather than facing the fist of the axis of resistance, they've been dealing with individual fingers. And I think this is something that was concerning to Iran a number of months ago, that they weren't fully prepared to engage as a full axis against Israel on a coordinated effort that wouldn't have them brought into the United States and caused a regional war. And so they were kind of in a damned if we do, damned if we don't situation. I think, and this plays out with how we know what occurred in Gaza back on October 7th, 2023, that the Hamas and PIJ, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Hamas, I guess, they carried out this attack without coordination with Hezbollah, without coordination with Iran. Because I think and from what we also know too, because they have, the Israelis have produced would seem like legitimate documents showing that the Hamas did try and bring Hezbollah and Iran into a major operation centering around October 7th. And both of them balked at that. Both of them, kind of ignored it. What do the kids say? Left them on red, kind of thing, like didn't get back to him on it. And, so I think you're seeing that Israel has pulled itself out of a very difficult situation. I shouldn't pull itself out. It's still in it, but it has shown an ability to peel off the axis of resistance one after another and be able to see its way through a situation that we have all felt, I shouldn't say we, but I certainly have, and I know others have, very difficult, very challenging, very dangerous from Israel. Now, they still have all kinds of problems, Israeli. I mean, the IDF is still overextended, even if with the Lebanon front quieting down, the IDF is still overextended. It's still exhausted. You hear that in Israel about the reservists not showing up. You hear stories about units not being able to go into to mobilize because their people aren't showing up. You hear that. Okay. In the economy in Israel is in terrible shape. Worse for the Palestinians, of course, because they've been purposely economically strangled for decades. And now with the Israeli economy bleeding out, the consequences to the Palestinians, are downstream from that. So you have what happened after October 7th was the Israelis canceled all the work permits for the 200,000 Palestinians who work inside Israel every day. That's about a fifth of the Palestinian labor force in the West Bank. So the economic consequences have been massive for the Palestinians, but you see it for the Israelis as well as for the Palestinians in East Jerusalem. So people who are familiar with Jerusalem, you go and you visit the Mount of Olives, and you're on this great hill overlooking the old city, and there's usually, I don't know, 1,000, 1,500 people there. My group, we were the only people there for well over an hour. We went down to the Garden of Gethsemane, same thing. There was nobody there. We went to the Church of Nations, this beautiful church next to the olive grove there. And, there are two other people in that church. We went to the Holy Sepulchre, the place of Christ's crucifixion and his burial. And, I don't know if you've ever been there, Danny, but it's a mob scene. Normally you're in there and it's like you're in line for, like I said the other day, it's like you feel like you're in line for Space Mountain at Disneyland. It's that crowded. And now you just kind of breeze through it, no problem. So you saw this over and over and over again throughout Jerusalem, where you talk to the restaurant owners. Our hotel we were staying in, they hadn't been open in 10 months, and they opened up for us. And after we left, they closed again. So for both the Palestinians and the Israelis, this war has been catastrophic for them economically. And what the thing about it is, how is Israel still standing? Well, it's because of the Americans, because we have a loan guarantee. We're a guarantor of Israeli debt, of Israeli bonds. So what you've seen happen in the last year is, I've seen different numbers on this, but roughly between the Israelis have issued 3 to 4 times as many bonds in the last year as they normally do. And why are people buying Israeli bonds? Why are people taking on purchasing Israeli debt with all these indicators, with the war, with the situation, with the political situation, the economic situation, the military situation? Why are people buying Israeli bonds? Well, it's because the Americans are guarantors of those bonds, right? So, the money's going to be good. So even if it's a lower, you see this over and over again, but somehow the Israelis are managing to find a way through it that I think was very surprising to me, coupled with, the events of this last week or two, where they've been able to gain a victory, if you will, in Lebanon, right? If it holds and Hezbollah does not keep up with the attacks, Netanyahu's government will be able to send the settlers, the people of northern Israel, back to their homes, out of the hotels in Tel Aviv and Jaffa and other places they've been staying. That's a victory. That's one of his 4 criteria for ending the war. And I certainly scoffed at it. It's never going to happen. And looks like he may be able to do it. Now, whether or not this ceasefire holds, whether, what will occur with it, who knows? But certainly it seems as if Iran has backed off. I know last week when I was there was a lot of talk that Iran would be launching an attack imminently. It didn't come to play. It doesn't make sense now why Iran would do so. And so,
I saw that, by the way, I saw that Iran was backing the ceasefire and approved of it, implying that they want to tamp things down too because of the wounds they've suffered.
That's exactly right. And the Syrians, well, first of all, both the Israelis and the Americans have been bombing the Syrians. The Israelis never stopped bombing the Syrians, but in the last, several weeks, the U.S. has been bombing the Syrians a couple times a week now, I think. And now, of course, with this large HTS attack, which is a major attack, the Syrian government is going to be preoccupied. They are off balance. So again, the Palestinians are really on their own. And for all that we are disgusted with and infuriated by Israel and by the United States, by the empire, if you will, at this point, looking at it right now, they have been successful in their efforts.
Yeah, but Matt, I want to harken back to something you said at the first part of this, which is what I'm always focused on, is what is the prospect for long-term stability for Israel. And of course, number one, I weep for the people of Palestine, whether it's Gaza or the West Bank, or the people in Lebanon who have just been unwitting and powerless victims of all of this stuff that's been going on. I weep for them first, but I also weep for the Israelis, because these things have near-term successes. Because, like you said, you can't dispute it. Militarily, on the tactical level, those things have been working, but they are coming, and I believe, and I'd like your view on this, at a real cost, because I think the long-term, maybe even mid-term stability for Israeli security is probably not very high.
It's not, but for the Israeli political system, that's okay. They want to manage that. They want to manage this constant war. They want to have a constant threat.
Right, but see, you had mentioned earlier, you said that a lot of the Palestinian people were were powerless and they had no outlets. They couldn't even protest. They couldn't do nonviolent protests, and that would then lead to later on. So the question is, can they contain it if it turns into big violence later on?
Yeah, I mean, certainly they'll have to endure it, but I think their assumption is that they'll be able to keep it contained to within the West Bank, that they will be able to prevent the suicide attacks if those were to occur again, or whatever else the Palestinian resistance takes form, that you will not have attacks in Israel proper. We've already seen some of them though, but I'm assuming that their calculation is that it won't be enough to. Well, we also know too, Danny, like when these type of attacks occur within a society, they don't they bolster the society, right? They improve morale. They don't cause people to like give up. They don't weaken will. And so I think if maybe that's the calculation that they have, is that if there are attacks with it in Tel Aviv or Haifa or wherever, will the just cause Israeli people to rally around the flag further? So, I mean, it certainly is not a security or stability that anyone who's sane would accept, would want. But again, the purposes of all this are greater Israel. The purposes of all this are the expansionist Zionist policies and fulfilling them. We talk about Naftali Bennett a lot, right? Who says this is the best opportunity we've had in 50 years. And so this idea of annexation, and I think there are, and I should say, I think there are those within the Israeli political system who are against annexation, who rather just see military occupation. So basically see the status quo continue, maybe with a heavier hand, but certainly not take on annexation. But there's no voices, no groups, nothing of political significance in Israel that argues for anything other than military occupation or annexation. There's nothing there. And but you're right, though, in a sense of long term, what does this mean? But I think what we've seen from the responses at this point from Palestine's allies is something that gives confidence to the Israelis and to the Americans that we can continue to manage this. Okay, that what it will look like in the future will be like what we've seen in the last year, where we'll have to survive some missile attacks. There'll be drones. Their missiles and drones will get better. We'll lose. It'll be tough for us at times. We'll have bad PR on this. But we'll be able to get through it. That there won't be anything that certainly will be existential, and there won't be anything that will cause the public to be so dismayed, so disheartened, so weakened that we would have a loss of power here ourselves.
Okay, so let me ask you this, and we only have a few minutes left here. My show I did earlier today really analyzed the serious possibility that we could get into a big escalation in the Russia-Ukraine war and possibly even be drawn into direct conflict with Russia. We can't fight that kind of a war. We don't have the capacity. If something goes bad there and we get struck in there and get drawn into a war, all of a sudden, all of this non-question support for Israel could either evaporate or radically dry up, as we would now need all of our resources for ourselves somewhere else. And if we don't win that war, and I think that there's a bigger chance than a lot of people would believe, that we could literally lose a war. And of course, if this goes nuclear, then forget everything we say, because it doesn't matter then. But if it stayed conventional, we could literally lose in many different ways. If for whatever reason American support, whether diplomatically or physically, were for Israel to dry up, can they continue to manage on their own long term?
No, they can't. They can't. I mean, certainly they would. That's a death knell for Israel if they lose the United States. I don't see them losing it. I think we would not participate in a war in Europe if you had the choice had to be made. If there's we've only got so much to do. One, what are we going to do? The Americans will choose Israel over Ukraine, Eastern Europe. So I don't think, the problem would be, of course, is if it's not a choice, if it's something that we are,
that's
right,
exactly
as you're saying. Yeah, at that point, if Israel loses that support, particularly the economic backing, right, the ability, now all of a sudden they're not able to keep themselves afloat by selling bonds, then the economy starts to crash. The government starts to really become bankrupt, and people start to really feel the pain. And at that point, then I think you start to see consequences within Israeli society. but those are going to be terrible consequences. I know everyone likes to think, not I shouldn't say everyone, people like to think about this, that Israel's going to collapse and it's going to be wonderful and everything else. It could be the worst thing possible if there's an Israeli collapse, because you're talking about a fanatical religious government, essentially, that has an end times eschatology to it, right? These folks believe in an Armageddon, and they're armed with nuclear weapons and their country's collapsing. I mean, that's a it's a horrible thought to have to accept that that's where it could be. So really, I mean, the options, if we had a crystal ball, right, Danny, the options are worse and worse and worse.
Indeed they are. Well, listen, we'll have to leave it there for right now, but really appreciate you coming on today and wow, giving us this firsthand information from what you've seen on the ground there. It's been really, really eye-opening, if not very sobering and discouraging in some regards. But like we always do here, Daniel Davis Deep Dive, we want the truth no matter what it is. So we're really grateful for you coming on today.
Hey, thanks, Danny.
And we thank you guys too. I appreciate you as always. Be sure and like and subscribe if you haven't on your way out. And we'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive.